My wife's sister moved in for a week and stayed for 11. Not because circumstances changed and extended the visit in a way that made sense. Because she decided she liked the arrangement and was comfortable, and comfortable people do not leave comfortable arrangements unless something makes them uncomfortable. I was not making her uncomfortable. I was making pasta 3 times a week, opening good wine on Tuesday evenings, changing the guest room linens every 4 days, and listening to her tell me the pasta was dry and the wine was pedestrian, and the linens had a smell she could not quite place, but that was definitely there. 11 weeks. Every day some version of the pasta commentary. Every evening some version of the wine assessment. Twice, she reorganized the kitchen while I was at work, and then explained to me when I got home why the previous arrangement had been wrong. Once she turned off a sports game I was watching because she found the sound distracting and needed the room to make a call. She needed the room to make a call. In my house. My wife's name is Carol. Carol is a good woman and a good wife, and she has exactly one significant character weakness, which is that she cannot say a direct no to her younger sister Sandra, who has understood this for 34 years and has constructed her entire relationship with Carol around it. I had conversations with Carol. 6 of them. Each one produced a version of the same response. She is going through a difficult time. She does not have anyone else. Give her a little more time. By week 10, I understood that little more time was not a concept with a defined endpoint, and that Sandra's difficult time was going to remain conveniently difficult for as long as the arrangement provided free accommodation, free wine, and someone to insult at dinner. So on a Saturday night at 11:15, while Sandra was asleep in the guest room, I took everything out. The bed, the dresser, the nightstand, the chair, the lamp, the bedding including the blankets and the pillows. All of it. I had sold it that afternoon to a consignment furniture buyer who had come with a truck. The truck had been waiting around the corner while I confirmed Sandra was home and asleep. Then it pulled in and we moved quickly and quietly and efficiently, and the truck was gone by 11:45. I put the lamp I had borrowed from the office back in the office. I went to bed. At 7:18 the next morning, Sandra knocked on our bedroom door. She said, "There is a situation." I said, "Good morning, Sandra." She said, "The room, everything is gone." I said, "I know." She said, "What do you mean you know?" I said, "I sold it last night." She said, "You sold my furniture." I said, "My furniture, which was in my guest room, which I sold because I needed the capital for something, and it seemed like the right time." She said, "I was sleeping in there." I said, "Not on the furniture anymore, no." Carol was awake by this point, watching me from her side of the bed with an expression that was 1 part mortified and 2 parts trying not to smile. Sandra did not leave immediately. She stood in the hallway for 15 minutes conducting a debate with herself about what the appropriate response was. Then she went back to the guest room and closed the door. An hour later, the Uber arrived. She carried 2 bags down the stairs without saying anything to either of us. At the front door, she turned around. She looked at me. She said, "You are not a kind man." I said, "You drank my wine for 11 weeks and told me every Tuesday evening it was pedestrian." She left. The Uber pulled away. Carol looked at me. She said, "You sold the furniture." I said, "I sold the furniture." She said, "While she was sleeping." I said, "Yes." She said, "That is terrible." She said it with the expression of someone who did not find it terrible. She said, "I am going to have to call her." I said, "Probably." She said, "She is going to be very angry." I said, "I know." She said, "And you?" I said, "I am going to make breakfast." I made breakfast. It was good. Before I tell you what Carol said on the phone and what Sandra said back, and what the following months looked like in the broader family dynamic, I want to tell you where I came from. Because a man who sells the guest room furniture at 11 p.m. while his wife's sister sleeps in it is not a man acting impulsively. He is a man who has reached a very specific and clearly delineated endpoint. And getting to that endpoint required 11 weeks of daily evidence that I want to lay out for you properly. Like this video right now. Subscribe to the channel, ring the notification bell, and comment below. When I said I sold the furniture while she was sleeping, what was your reaction? Let us start from the beginning. My name is Paul Harrington, and I am 51 years old. I live in Columbus, Ohio, in a house I bought in 2011 in the Short North neighborhood, which was then an up-and-coming area and which is now completely up and has been arrived at for about 8 years, and which has the specific quality of a neighborhood that people move to when they want to feel like they made a good decision. I did make a good decision, but the decision was based on understanding the neighborhood and the timing and the real estate dynamics of the area, not on wanting to feel good about it, which is a distinction I would make about most decisions I have made in my professional life. I worked in commercial real estate for 22 years. Not development, transaction advisory, the specific work of helping companies understand what their real estate portfolio was doing, what it should be doing, what the gap between those two things cost them, and what it would take to close the gap. It was precision work. It rewarded exactness and penalized assumption. I was good at it. My father, Gene Harrington, had been a high school history teacher in Westerville for 31 years. He was not a man of commerce. He was a man of ideas and of the specific patience with young people that great teachers developed, and that became the defining quality of their interaction with everyone. He listened completely before he responded. He did not reward performance. He rewarded clarity. He said to me once, when I was 17 and had been in an argument with a friend that had gotten more heated than the underlying disagreement warranted, what was the argument actually about? I said, he said something that was wrong and I corrected him. He said, what was the correcting supposed to produce? I said, he was supposed to understand he was wrong. He said, did he? I said, no. He said, then what did the argument produce? I said, nothing. He said, the argument was about something other than being right. What was it about? I thought. I said, I wanted him to admit I was right. He said, which is a different goal. Admitting you are right requires him to lose something. Understanding a correction requires him to gain something. These produce different responses. He said, next time decide which one you actually want before you start. I thought about this for years. I still think about it. It was the reason I did not argue with Sandra for 11 weeks. Because arguing with Sandra required her to lose something, and Sandra did not lose things gracefully, and arguing with her would have produced nothing except damage to Carol and Sandra's relationship, and more elaborate performance of discomfort at dinner. I chose a different approach. I chose the approach of a man who understood what the argument was actually about. The argument was not about the wine or the pasta or the reorganized kitchen. The argument was about who decided how the house operated. I decided. My decision was expressed at 11:15 on a Saturday night with a consignment furniture truck, and 4 efficient young men who understood that speed was the relevant skill for this particular transaction. That was the approach. But before I tell you the weeks that led to it, I need to tell you about Carol and how Carol and I became the people we were by the time Sandra arrived, and why Carol's response to the whole situation was the response of someone who loved her husband and her sister simultaneously, and who found the furniture decision painful and secretly correct in equal measure. I met Carol in 2008 at a professional development conference in Cleveland. She was there for the same organization I was there for, representing a different company. We ended up at the same breakout session, and then the same dinner table by the specific randomness of conference seating that was actually not random because I had looked at the name cards and selected the seat beside hers based on a 20-second assessment that she was the most interesting person in the visible range. She was a tax attorney. She is still a tax attorney. She has the specific quality of someone who is genuinely good at a thing that other people find impenetrable, and who can explain that thing at any level of abstraction required without losing either the accuracy or the patience. She is warm and specific, and she is honest in the way that I had been trained to value by 31 years of watching my father teach. She is also, as I said, constitutionally unable to say a direct no to Sandra. Not for lack of ability in general. She says no to clients, to opposing counsel, to requests that are unreasonable, to situations that need to be declined. She does this with the calm precision of a woman who has never been afraid of the word. She says it to everyone, except Sandra. With Sandra, every no became a maybe. Every maybe became a yes eventually. Every yes produced a situation that lasted longer than intended and required management that fell to me, while Carol managed the emotional dimension. We had been married 7 years when Sandra arrived. In those 7 years, I had seen the Sandra pattern 3 times. First time, Sandra visited for a long weekend that became 9 days because she was going through something with a boyfriend. She left when the boyfriend situation resolved. Second time, Sandra visited for a holiday and stayed an extra week because she and her mother had argued about something and she did not want to go home to the situation. She left when the something passed. Third time, Sandra arrived without a defined departure date and stayed 11 weeks. By the time the third visit arrived, Carol and I had had a number of conversations about the pattern, all of which had produced agreement and none of which had produced change. I want to be honest about this because the story requires honesty. The failure was not Sandra's alone. The failure was an arrangement that Carol could not close and that I had not forced to close. Until I did. Sandra arrived on a Friday evening in March. She had broken up with someone. She was between apartments. She needed a few days to get her bearings. Carol called me at the office to let me know. I said, "How long is a few days?" Carol said she is not sure yet, she needs time. I said, "Okay." Sandra arrived with 3 bags and an energy that was the energy of someone who had not fully decided whether they were a guest or a resident, and who was comfortable in that ambiguity. She was 36 years old. She was between things in the specific way of a person who was always between things and who had become skilled at making the between comfortable enough that the thing on the other side was never urgently necessary. She was not a bad person. I want to say that clearly because the furniture story could suggest otherwise. She was a person who had been allowed to take more than was offered for long enough that she had lost the ability to distinguish between the two. She took, not maliciously, by habit. The habit had been enabled by Carol and by their mother and by every relationship Sandra had had in which the other party had chosen accommodation over conflict. I had chosen accommodation for 11 weeks. And then I had chosen conflict. Not dramatic conflict. The very specific and targeted conflict of removing the thing that made the accommodation comfortable. The wine started in week 1. Not taking it without asking. Sandra asked. She asked Carol, who said yes, because Carol always said yes. And Carol's yes was apparently transferable to any evening Sandra felt like wine, regardless of whether Carol was there or whether it was a Tuesday night. And the bottle was something I had been given by a client that had some significance beyond its contents. I said nothing. The pasta commentary started in week 2. I had made cacio e pepe on a Wednesday evening. It was a dish I had been making for 7 years, and that I had gotten consistently good at, and that Carol usually received with the specific appreciation of someone who understood that food prepared with care was worth appreciating. Sandra had eaten about a third of it. She had said, "It is a bit dry. Is it supposed to be that consistency?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Interesting. I usually find it more sauce-forward when I have it in restaurants." I said, "This is the Roman preparation, less sauce." She said, "Maybe that is the issue." She went back to her phone. I looked at Carol. Carol looked at the table. I ate my pasta. In week 3, Sandra reorganized the spice cabinet. I came home on a Tuesday to find the spices alphabetical. They had previously been organized by frequency of use, which was the logical system for a person who cooked daily and who knew where things were because of where things were rather than because of what letter they started with. I said nothing. I used the new arrangement for 3 days. Then I moved everything back. Sandra noticed. She said, "I organized those." I said, "I know, I prefer the other way." She said, "The alphabetical is more logical." I said, "Logical for someone who does not know where anything is. I know where everything is." She said, "It is still more logical." I said, "It is your preference. My kitchen uses my system." She looked at Carol. Carol looked at the table. This was the pattern. Sandra expressed a position. I explained why the position did not apply. Sandra appealed to Carol. Carol found the table interesting. In week 4, Sandra turned off the football game. She did not ask. She picked up the remote and she turned off the television and she said, "I need the room for a call, do you mind?" She said it the way people said, "Do you mind?" when they had already decided the answer was no and were offering the question as a courtesy. I looked at her. I said, "I do mind." She said, "It will only be 20 minutes." I said, "Sandra, I am watching something." She said, "It is just sport." I said, "It is sport I would like to continue watching." She said, "Carol, do you mind if I use the room?" Carol said, "I am upstairs." Sandra looked at me. I said, 20 minutes. I went upstairs. I came back in 40. The call was still going. I went back upstairs. I sat in the bedroom and I did the thing I did when I needed to think, which was make a list. The list was titled, "Weeks Remaining versus Acceptable Threshold." I had been tracking this since week 3. At week 4, the list told me something. Subscribe to this channel right now and ring the notification bell. Week 5 was the wine incident. Not the taking of it, a specific bottle. In 2019, I had attended a charity dinner for a hospital foundation. The dinner had a wine auction as its centerpiece. I had bid on and won a single bottle, a 2015 Barolo from a small producer in Piedmont whose name I had written in my phone specifically so I would not forget it. I had paid $400 for it at the auction. I had been waiting for the right occasion. The bottle was in the wine rack in the pantry. I had not told Sandra about it specifically. On a Thursday evening in week 5, I came home and the bottle was on the kitchen counter. Open. About a third gone. Sandra was at the kitchen table with a glass. She said, "The red is nice. What is it?" I looked at the bottle. I said, "Where did you find that?" She said, "In the rack. Is it something special?" I said, "It is a 2015 Barolo that I bought at a charity auction for $400 that I was saving for a specific occasion." She said, "Oh." She looked at the glass. She said, "It is very good." I said, "Yes." I took the bottle from the counter. I put it in the cabinet above the refrigerator. I did not say anything else. I called Carol from the bedroom. I said, the Barolo. She said, I know, I am so sorry. I did not know she had found it. I said, Carol, I need to tell you something directly. She said, okay. I said, Sandra is not a guest anymore. She is a resident, and she is a resident who is operating in this house as if she has the authority to do so. I am past the point where patience is the right tool. Carol said, she's going through a hard time. I said, she has been going through a hard time for 5 weeks. A hard time is real. This is not a hard time anymore. This is an arrangement she has found comfortable. Carol said, give me a little more time to talk to her. I said, how much time? Carol said, a week or 2. I said, 2 weeks. Carol talked to Sandra. Sandra had a conversation with Carol that Carol described to me as productive. The following Tuesday, Sandra poured a glass of the wine she had opened, the non-Barolo wine that was the regular house wine, and said to me at dinner, the pasta is better this week. I said, same recipe. She said, maybe you adjusted something. I said, no. She said, Week 6 passed. Week 7. In week 7, Sandra reorganized the refrigerator. Not the spice cabinet, the refrigerator. I opened the refrigerator on a Monday morning to get the creamer I put in my coffee every morning, and it was not where it lived. Where it lived was the top shelf right side. It was now on the second shelf left side, and the right side top was Sandra's yogurt and some fruit she had bought. I moved the creamer. I moved the yogurt. I moved the fruit. I put everything back where it belonged. She noticed within the hour. She said, I organized that for a reason. I said, Sandra. She said, I prefer the dairy lower. I said, this is not your refrigerator. She said, I live here. I said, you are a guest here. She said, I have been here 7 weeks. I said, yes, you have. We looked at each other. She said, I will be out of your hair soon. I said, okay. She reorganized the refrigerator the following morning. I moved everything back. She reorganized it again. I moved it back. We did this 4 times over 3 days. On the 4th time I moved it back, I said nothing and did nothing and then went to my office and made a note in my list. The list was now titled, Timeline and Approach. I had been doing research. The research was about consignment furniture buyers in Columbus. I had 3 options within reasonable driving distance. The best one, based on reviews and the specific quality I was looking for, which was someone who came to the house with a truck and moved quickly, was a company called Capital City Consignments on 5th Avenue. I called them on a Thursday in week 9. I described what I had. A queen bed frame and headboard, a dresser with 6 drawers, a nightstand, a reading chair, a floor lamp, bedding set. The person on the phone said, what condition? I said, excellent, all less than 5 years old, well maintained. She said, we can come out for an assessment. The assessment happened on Friday. The assessment person walked through the guest room. She said, $2,000 for everything. The bed frame is good quality. I said I was thinking more. She said, $2,200. That is fair for this market. I said, when can you pick up? She said, we have a slot Saturday afternoon, but we need to confirm the property is clear. I said, the property will be occupied, but I will coordinate access. I need the pickup after 11 p.m. She said, we do not typically do late pickups. I said, I will pay a premium for the late pickup. She said, how late? I said, after 10:30, call me when you are close. She said, $2,400 with the late fee. I said, agreed. She said, do you want to confirm Saturday? I said, confirm Saturday. On Saturday morning, Sandra came down for coffee. She was wearing the robe she had purchased, and hung on the back of the guest room door that I had been looking at for 11 weeks. She said, "Morning." I said, "Morning." She said, "What is the plan today?" I said, "I have some things to take care of." She said, "Carol and I might go to brunch." I said, "Sounds good." They went to brunch. I spent Saturday afternoon doing exactly what I do before any important decision. I made sure I was clear about what I was doing and why. I was clear. I was removing the thing that made the arrangement comfortable. Not throwing her out, not confronting her, not having the sixth conversation with Carol that would produce the same outcome as the previous 5. Removing the comfort. Targeted, specific, complete. At 10:30, I texted the number from Capital City Consignments. I said, "Ready when you are." At 11:15 they arrived. I confirmed Sandra was asleep. The light under the guest room door was off. I knocked once lightly and heard nothing. I opened the door. She was asleep. I gestured to the crew. 4 men, they were good. They moved with the specific efficiency of people who had done this many times and who understood that speed was the relevant variable. The bed was out in 12 minutes. The dresser in 7. The nightstand in 3. The chair in 2. The lamp in 2. The bedding, blankets, pillows, all of it, in the bag they had brought for that purpose. The robe from the back of the door. At 11:45 the room was empty. I walked through it once. Clean bare floor, the window, the overhead light. I turned off the light. I went to bed. At 7:18 the next morning Sandra knocked on the door. The conversation in the hallway lasted about 4 minutes. "Sandra, the room is empty." Me, "I know." "Sandra, you sold everything." Me, "Yes, last night." Sandra, "While I was sleeping." Me, "The timing was practical." Sandra, "Practical." Me, "Yes." Sandra, "I was sleeping on that bed." Me, "You were. Now you are standing in the hallway." Sandra, "This is unbelievable." Me, "It is a fairly clear situation." Sandra, "You cannot just sell furniture that someone is using." Me, "The furniture belongs to me. The room is my guest room. I sold my furniture from my room." She looked at me for a long moment with the expression of someone who is encountering a form of obstruction they have never encountered before, and who is trying to identify the lever that usually moves these situations. There was no lever. She went back to the guest room. She closed the door. I heard her on the phone. I could not make out specifics. The tone was the tone of a woman who was calling someone to confirm that what had happened and to establish that there was a witness to the outrage. Carol came downstairs 40 minutes later. She was carrying a coffee. She sat across from me at the kitchen table. She said, "You sold the furniture." I said, "Yes." She said, "The bed she was sleeping in." I said, "Technically she was sleeping on the mattress. The mattress was sold as part of the frame. She was on the floor by the end." Carol looked at her coffee. She said, "Paul." I said, "Yes." She said, "That was extreme." I said, "It was effective." She said, "She is very upset." I said, "I expect she is." She said, "You could have just asked her to leave." I said, "I asked you to ask her to leave twice. We had 6 conversations about the situation over 11 weeks. The conversations produced the same outcome each time." She said, "You should have asked her directly." I said, "Possibly. But I understood that a direct ask would produce either a scene or a performance of agreeing that had no action behind it. I chose an approach that required action." She said, "Removing all the furniture." I said, "It was my furniture in my room, and I decided to sell it." She said, "While she was sleeping." I said, "She was asleep. The operation was quiet. She was not disturbed until 7 this morning." Carol looked at me. She said, "You are not sorry." I said, "I am sorry for the stress it has caused you. I am not sorry for the decision." She said, "She is going to call my mother." I said, "I expect she will." She said, "My mother is going to call me." I said, "I expect that too." She said, "What do I tell her?" I said, "Tell her that I asked Sandra to leave through normal channels, and it did not produce results, and I found an alternative approach." She said, "An alternative approach." I said, "That is one way to describe it." She looked at her coffee. She said, "I should have told her to leave weeks ago." I said, "Yes." She said, "I know." I said, "I know you know." She said, "She is my sister." I said, "Yes, and this is my house." She said, "Our house." I said, "Our house, in which Sandra has been living as a resident for 11 weeks while insisting that my wine was pedestrian and my pasta was dry and reorganizing my refrigerator 4 times." Carol said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "The Barolo." I said, "The Barolo, yes." She said, "Paul." I said, "Yes." She said, "The furniture was extreme." I said, "Yes." She said, "But she really should have left weeks ago." I said, "Yes." She said, "And the conversations were not working." I said, "No." She said, "And she drank the Barolo." I said, "A significant portion of it, yes." She sat with all of this for a moment. Then she said, "I am going to tell you something, and I need you to receive it generously." I said, "Okay." She said, "Watching you do that was the most specifically satisfying thing I have seen in a long time, and I cannot say that out loud to Sandra or my mother, but I wanted to say it to you." I said, "I appreciate that." She said, "Do not tell anyone I said that." I said, "It stays here." She stood. She said, "I am going to go talk to her." I said, "Okay." She said, "She is going to leave today." I said, "That was the idea." She went upstairs. Sandra came down with her bags at 9:40. She was dressed. She had the specific composure of someone who had made the decision to perform dignity rather than allow the full emotional response to be visible. She was quite good at it. She put her bags by the door. She looked at me. She said, "You are not a kind man." I said, "You drank my wine for 11 weeks and told me every Tuesday it was pedestrian." She said it was pedestrian. I said it was a $4,000 cellar. 3 of those Tuesdays you were drinking a Burgundy that cost $200. She said, "Money does not make something good." I said, "No, but it is a reasonable indicator." She said, "This is not over." I said, "Sandra, it is over. The guest room is empty and you have your bags at the door and the Uber is coming." She said, "I mean with Carol, I will not forget what you did." I said, "I assume not." She said, "I hope it was worth it to you." I said, "Significantly, yes." She looked at Carol, who was standing at the bottom of the stairs. She said, "Are you going to let him talk to me like this?" Carol said, "Sandra, he sold furniture. He did not say anything to you that was not true." Sandra looked at her sister for a moment. She picked up her bags. She went out the front door. The Uber arrived 40 seconds later. She put her bags in the car. She did not look back. Carol closed the front door. She turned around. She looked at me. I said, "Breakfast?" She said, "Yes." I made eggs. They were good. Subscribe to this channel right now. Ring that notification bell. Carol took the call in the bedroom. I was in the kitchen cleaning up from breakfast. I could hear the tone of the conversation through the door without hearing specific words. The tone had the specific quality of a conversation where one person was delivering information and the other person was managing what was being delivered. Carol came out 20 minutes later. She sat at the kitchen table. She said, my mother is very upset. I said, I expected that. She said, she wants to talk to you. I said, okay. She called her mother back. She handed me the phone. Evelyn said, Paul. I said, Evelyn. She said, what happened over there? I said, Sandra had been with us for 11 weeks and had not made progress toward leaving. I took a step that made the situation uncomfortable enough that she decided to go. Evelyn said, you sold her bed. I said, I sold my furniture from my guest room, yes. Evelyn said, while she was sleeping in it. I said, technically the mattress. The frame had already been moved by the time she woke up. Evelyn said, Paul, that was cruel. I said, Evelyn, I want to tell you something directly. She said, go ahead. I said, Sandra arrived 3 bags and a cup of coffee and an announced departure of a few days. She reorganized my kitchen twice and my refrigerator 4 times. She opened a $400 auction wine on a Thursday evening because it was in the rack and it looked nice. She told me my cooking was mediocre at most meals and my wine was pedestrian at most evenings. She took over my living room for extended phone calls and asked me to leave. She did all of this for 11 weeks because leaving was never necessary. I said, I made it necessary. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. She said, she is going through something. I said, she has been going through something since I met her 14 years ago. The something is that she prefers to be in arrangements that others maintain because she has learned that others will maintain them. She said that is harsh. I said it is accurate. Harsh and accurate are different things. She said she is my daughter. I said I know, and she is Carol's sister. Those relationships are real and I respect them. What I do not respect is the extension of those relationships into an assumption of indefinite access to my home. She said a week or 2 would have been fine. I said a week or 2 passed 11 weeks ago. She said, you should have talked to her directly. I said, I talked to Carol directly 6 times over 11 weeks. Carol talked to Sandra. The outcome did not change. Evelyn was quiet. She said, what were you thinking, selling the furniture? I said, I was thinking that the conversation approach had been exhausted and a different approach was needed. She said, this is not how you treat family. I said, Evelyn, with respect, I treated Sandra as a guest for 11 weeks longer than the situation warranted. What I did Saturday night was not how you treat family in the traditional sense, but what Sandra did for 11 weeks was also not how a guest treats a host. She said she is difficult. I know she is difficult. I said, I know you know. She said she has always been difficult. I said, I have noticed. Evelyn said nothing for a moment. Then she said, the furniture. I said, the furniture is sold. That is done. She said, you are not going to apologize. I said, I am sorry for the stress it has caused you and Carol. I am not sorry for the decision. She said, you are a stubborn man. I said, I prefer thorough. She said, put Carol back on. I gave Carol the phone. Carol went back to the bedroom. The conversation lasted another 30 minutes. When Carol came out, she said, my mother says you are the most infuriating person she has ever dealt with. I said, she has dealt with Sandra for 36 years. Carol said, I think she means it differently. I said, I know she does. She said, she also said, and this is directly quoting her, at least he did something. I said, what did you say to that? She said, I said that was one way to look at it. She sat down. She said, my mother has been managing Sandra's situations for 36 years. I said, I know. She said she is tired of it. I said, I know that too. She said she wishes someone had done something like this 10 years ago. I said, the furniture. She said, something. Anything that made the comfortable arrangement less comfortable. She said she loves Sandra, but she is tired. I said, most people who have been managing Sandra for a long time are tired. Carol said, including me. She said it quietly, and with the specific honesty of someone saying something they had been thinking for a long time. I said, I know. She said, I am sorry I could not do it myself. I said, Carol, you love your sister and you are not built to deliver direct consequences to people you love. That is not a failure. It is who you are. She said, it put everything on you. I said, some things are mine to handle. This was one of them. She said, the furniture was very extreme. I said, yes. She said, and completely effective. I said, yes. She said, I have mixed feelings. I said, I know. That is the correct response to what I did. She said, I keep thinking about her waking up. I said, I know. She said, on the floor. I said, with no blankets. She said, Paul. I said, yes. She said, the blankets were excessive. I said, the blankets went with the bedding set which went with the bed frame. She said, you could have left the blankets. I said I could have. I chose to be thorough. She looked at me. She said, you are a strange man sometimes. I said, I'm a precise man. It reads as strange sometimes. She said, is the Barolo gone? I said, mostly. About 60% remains. She said, do you want to open it this evening? I said, it is a Sunday and we have the house to ourselves. She said, that is what I thought. We opened the Barolo that evening. It was excellent. Sandra and Carol did not speak for 3 weeks. I want to be honest that this cost something real. Not to me. To Carol, who had spent 34 years as Sandra's closest ally and who felt the silence as a specific kind of loss even when she understood why the silence had come. I did not try to fill the silence with reassurance. I was present. I was consistent. I made dinner and I opened wine and I listened when Carol needed to talk, and I did not fill the other moments with commentary about how the situation had gotten to this point. That was the right approach. 3 weeks after the Uber, Sandra called Carol. Not to apologize, to report. She had found a sublet. She had started a new job. She had rebuilt some momentum. She called the way she always called when things were okay, which was with energy and the specific forward-looking quality of someone who had moved past the recent past. She did not mention the furniture directly. She said, I want you to know I am doing well. Carol said, I am glad. She said, and I want you to know that I understand things got too long. Carol said, it did get too long. Sandra said, I'm not saying what Paul did was right. Carol said, okay. Sandra said, but I am saying I understand why things felt like they needed something. Carol said, okay. Sandra said, he is a very extreme person. Carol said, he is a very precise person. Sandra said, those are different things. Carol said, sometimes. Sandra said, is he there? Carol said, yes. Sandra said, I do not need to talk to him. Carol said, okay. Sandra said, tell him the wine was good. Carol said, I will tell him. She told me. I said, which night? She said she did not specify. I said it was probably the Burgundy. The Barolo has a more distinctive profile. She said, Paul. I said, yes. She said, just say thank you. I said, thank you to Sandra. She said, yes. I said, for acknowledging the wine. She said, for calling, for being the size of it, for starting to move in the right direction. I said, okay. I said, tell her the wine was good because she has reasonable taste even if she does not know what she is drinking. Carol said, I'm not telling her that. I said, it is a compliment. She said, it is a backhanded compliment. I said, it is the most accurate compliment I can produce. She shook her head. She called Sandra back. She told her the wine was good. Sandra said, I knew it was. The guest room is furnished again. Different furniture. I chose it myself on a Saturday afternoon 3 months after the Uber. A simpler setup, a bed frame that was clean and functional, a nightstand, a lamp. No reading chair. The reading chair had been the furniture I had most regretted in the previous arrangement, not for sentimental reasons, but because the reading chair had been the most comfortable piece in the room, and comfortable pieces in guest rooms were a specific kind of risk. Carol said, no chair. I said, no chair. She said, people need somewhere to sit. I said, there is the bed and the nightstand and the lamp. That is a functional guest room. She said, you are being pointed. I said, I am being appropriate. She said, Sandra is going to notice there is no chair. I said, yes. She said, when she visits. I said, if she visits. She said, she will visit. I said, I know. She said, when she does, what is the arrangement? I said, the arrangement is that we discuss it in advance, both of us, and we agree on a timeline and a structure before she arrives. She said, she may not like that. I said, the furniture may not like not having a chair. Both things will adjust. She said, Paul. I said, yes. She said, I want to say something. I said, say it. She said, the furniture incident was the most effective thing that has happened in my relationship with Sandra in 20 years. I said, how so? She said, because for the first time in 20 years, Sandra understood that an arrangement had a limit. That comfortable did not mean permanent, that other people's houses had terms. She said she has never understood that before. I said she is beginning to. She said, because of a furniture truck at 11 p.m. I said, sometimes the clearest statement is the one that does not require words. She said, you are insufferable. I said, but correct. She said, but correct. She said, I want to ask you something. I said, ask. She said, when you were sitting in the bedroom in week 4 making your list, what were you actually planning? I said, I was planning the clearest possible response to a situation that had not responded to any other kind of input. She said, you were planning the furniture from week 4. I said, I was identifying the approach from week 4. The specific execution came together in week 9. She said, 5 weeks of planning. I said, the research took some time. She said, the consignment company. I said, the late pickup premium was a negotiation. She said, you negotiated a late night furniture removal premium. I said, $2,200 versus $2,400. The $400 was the premium for the time. She looked at me. She said, you are a very specific person. I said, precise. She said, yes. She said, do you know what Sandra said to my mother about you? I said, what? She said you were the most organized person she had ever been defeated by. I said, defeated is a strong word. She said, it is Sandra's word. I said, I prefer redirected. She said, you redirected her out of the house with a furniture truck. I said, yes. She said, and she is doing better now. I said, yes. She said, the sublet is working out. I said, yes. She said, and she got the job. I said, yes. She said, so the redirection worked. I said, the redirection produced conditions in which she had to make arrangements for herself. She made them. That is her success, not mine. She said, but she would not have made them if you had not removed the comfortable. I said, the comfortable was not helping her. She said, no. She said, it was not helping me either. She said, Paul. I said, yes. She said, I am sorry it took furniture. I said, sometimes it takes furniture. She said, I am going to be better about saying no. I said, I know you will try. She said she is going to visit. I said I know. She said and there is no chair. I said there is no chair. She said she is going to ask about the chair. I said, and I am going to say I prefer the room without one. She said, and if she asks for a chair to be brought in. I said, we will discuss it and agree on terms before anything gets moved. She said, including duration. I said, especially duration. She said, okay. She said, I am going to get us some wine. I said, the Barolo is down to about 40%. She said we should finish it. I said yes. She got the Barolo. We sat at the kitchen table in a house that had the specific quality of a house with the right number of people in it. The guest room upstairs had a bed and a nightstand and a lamp and no chair. It was a functional room. It had limits. Limits were the right thing. Here is what this story is actually about. Not the furniture. The furniture is the part that produces the image, and the image is good. A woman waking up on a bare floor where a furnished room used to be is a specific kind of moment. But the story is about what my father asked me when I was 17. What is the argument actually about? The argument in this house for 11 weeks was not about pasta or wine or spice cabinets or refrigerator organization. The argument was about who decided what the arrangement was. Sandra had decided. She had decided because in her entire experience of living in the world, in her relationships with Carol and her mother, and everyone who had ever made room for her, she had been the one who decided. She decided when to arrive. She decided when to leave. She decided what was pedestrian and what needed improvement and whose kitchen needed reorganization. She decided because nobody had ever held the other position with enough conviction to produce a different outcome. I held the other position. Not with words, with a furniture truck. Because I had tried words and words had not worked, and the argument was not going to be won by the person who said the right things. It was going to be won by the person who did the thing that changed the material reality of the situation. The chair I did not put back in the guest room is the most important detail. The chair is the marker. The room has terms now. The terms are mine and Carol's, agreed together, applied consistently. Sandra knows the room has terms. She learned it on a Sunday morning, standing on a bare floor in her pajamas. She is doing better. The uncomfortable sometimes produces the necessary. My father would have said, the argument was about who was comfortable. You changed who was comfortable. The argument ended. He would have been right. He usually was. Thank you for being here for this story. Like this video right now, if the bare floor image made you feel something. Subscribe to this channel and ring that notification bell. New story every week, real ones. Share this with someone who has a Sandra in their life. Someone who cannot say no to a person who has made themselves comfortable in a space they were supposed to be passing through. Let them see that there is an approach. Comment below. Tell me what you would have done differently. Tell me if you have a Sandra. Tell me what your furniture truck moment was or should have been.